And I think we are live. Wow. For some reason, my Blackmagic Thunder Intensity Shuttle, or whatever it was that I was using, that ended up being a little bit finicky. So it just up and quit this morning. So we're using I'm using my fallback, which I'm grateful that I do have a fallback. But I think we are live, and I am super excited to be here to chat with you all about this important subject. So I was hoping I was going to be a couple minutes early. It looks like I am 8 minutes late. So I had a couple things I was going to show you. We went to a what's called a demolition derby on Saturday, and I don't know, for those of you that are outside the U.S., I don't know if you have ever heard of such a thing. It's actually hilarious to watch. It's when people get together and there's a whole bunch of old cars. Most of them have already been wrecked, so they're pretty well just going to be for the junkyard, and guys fix them up a little bit and take out the glass and make it pretty safe. It's and then they go smash those cars into each other. So if we would have been early, I would have posted, I would have showed you this video here. But it was there you go. There's a quick little preview of it. But yeah, it was it's pretty entertaining to watch. So without that, I think we're just going to jump in, go and get started here. I'm going to stop this. Actually, just a second. I like to do this. Where is everybody located? It's just say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever you are, whatever is applicable to you. And then just say what country you're from. I always love seeing the spread of countries here in the world. And while you're doing that, and then we'll go ahead and get started in just a second. But I noticed one of my children left a bag of project parts here on my sofa back here. So I'm going to get that cleaned off. It's going to bug me every single time I look in my camera. So 1 second here. All right. Oh, Malaysia, Austin, Texas. Hey, Joseph, Mexico, Bolivia, Poland. Wonderful. It is so good to have you all here. And I hope you are just as hungry to learn about this subject as I am excited to teach it. Like, this has been an area of growth for me. I will make it very clear. Actually, let me just go ahead and get started. I'm about to start stealing my own thunder. So not a good thing. Let's go ahead. You're not going to see or hear anything from me for just a second. And then you're going to see an intro slide. Then we're going to go ahead and get started. It is such a wonderful time to be with you all here as we are going to dive into an important subject. I've been on this big kick lately of writing code that is stable. All come back to this Art of E-commerce debugging book. If you haven't ordered your copy, this is not going to be a sales pitch, by the way, but make sure to do that. I've been getting such incredibly good feedback, which makes me very happy to hear. The videos, these Ninja Series videos that we're doing, my goal is to help make you to be an expert on the Magento platform. And I'm doing it for free because I am so passionate about helping people all over the world to master whatever platform it is. And I think a lot of what we're going to talk about is applicable everywhere. But I'm coming from a Magento background, so we're going to have mostly Magento references here, but at least the ideas are very transferable across many different e-commerce platforms. Our last Ninja training, we talked about writing bug-free code, and I put bug-free into air quotes because no code will ever be bug-free, but there's a lot that we can do to make it as bug-free as possible. Now, we kind of touched on this just a little bit, and I promised you this next month we'd be talking about this very subject we're talking about today. But the idea is as we write bug-free code or solid dry code, which both of those are acronyms, if you didn't catch that, the idea is we will be able to test this code. And I know what you're saying, or at least you're thinking. So testing is like the most dreaded subject in, I don't know, it seems like for most e-commerce developers. writing integration unit tests, it seems terrifying to do that. And I get that. I get that because it seems like, where do we start? How do we do it? In much of the same way, it seems like, I don't know. It seems like the same way it's just getting into Magento 2 in the first place. It's such a steep learning curve filled with so many mistakes and problems and potholes and busted out bridges and all sorts of problems. And yet, finally, when we get into it, it actually kind of starts making sense. It starts coming together. And I think writing tests is going to be the same way for you. It has been for me. So here's the disclaimer I need to start with. And that is that I do not consider myself the world's foremost expert at writing tests of any size, shape, or sort. I am not there. I am on a journey myself, just as I know you are on your own journeys. I figure if we all work together, we pool our talents, we share what we are learning, what we are fighting our way through, and we're all going to come out better. And that's exactly what this ninja training is here today. I hope it's a motivation. And I hope it is a legitimate way to overcome this fear, this intimidation over writing tests. We're going to delve into it from the very, very most basic ideas, and I hope to equip every one of you with this knowledge that you feel, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go write a test today. That's my goal. If I accomplish that, let me know. If I don't, let me know. Either way, I want to hear from you. And one excellent way to hear from you is this. We have a Slack channel, and I am so proud of the community that we have developed there, the contributions of all of you who have answered questions, tough questions, some really wonky stuff. Dan, the other day, he was posting some crazy challenges that he was having. Or was it Mike? I can't remember. Everybody has been posting some really good challenges on there. People are getting answers, and they're good quality answers. And I'm not saying I'm the best in the industry by any stretch. There's people like Vinay who are like light years beyond where I am today. But at least I have kind of an idea as far as what is the right answer, what is the right general direction, and you're going to get good help into this community. If not, money back guarantee, whatever you paid to get into the community will be 100% refunded to you. Although it is a free community to join, so I guess that would be a $0 money back guarantee. So whatever that's worth to you. But feel free to join swiftauto.com/Slack. I would love to have your participation in that community. So let's jump through why writing tests. And I'm going to do this really quickly because I think all of you would agree that writing tests is kind of important. And we see a lot of good value from writing tests, but we still have those challenges to overcome. So let's just take a look here. We know writing tests is good. They're so difficult. It takes so much time to write these tests. How do we understand it? How do we break it apart? Oh, and we can't forget quotes and orders. Boy, those invoices. Can you imagine writing a test for invoices? What a pain that is. That's so difficult. Yes, I agree. But here's what I would propose as the most difficult hurdle for writing tests, and that is untestable code. Now, I think we would both agree, you and I would agree, that all code is testable. It's just a matter of how much time we want to invest in testing it. And the problem is we are all under the gun to hit our estimates, to not take those to go overestimate too much. And so when we're thinking about, okay, I have 8 hours to accomplish this, how would I write an integration test or a unit test and get this job done in 8 hours? I will say, in my experience, there is an element of the learning curve. It's going to take time to learn this. 100%, it will take time to learn this. You will be faster if you consistently apply effort to working to write tests. You'll be faster in 2 months from now than you are right now. Plain and simple, guarantee that. However, the other important ingredient is as we work to write testable code, tests become easier to write. We talked about a lot of aspects of writing testable code in our last conversation, so I'm not going to repeat those here and now. But needless to say, writing testable code is incredibly important. I want to quickly touch on the benefits. These benefits are super important, and I think you will agree with me on every one of them. This is my favorite one, this first one. It reduces bugs because we are able to instantly verify the result. We are able to say, this method works exactly as I intend it to work. And it will always work as I intend it to work as long as we are consistently running these tests. Number 2, once a test is written, it can verify the output at any point in the future. We are able to... This test is just like the code we write. This test is set in stone for the remainder of the project. Remember, I've said this several times, but I really do stand by this phrase that every line of code that we write is technical debt. Now, there are ways we can reduce that debt, and writing tests is one of those ways. I think we're all in agreement up to this point, and I think we will continue to be in agreement as we go forward. Another benefit, it reduces the cases where we have to go to the browser and recreate a scenario to debug. This is really powerful. The other day, I was working on a situation, and I talked about this on our recent Smash the Bug podcast, which if you have not subscribed to that already, make sure you do that. It's where I publish the videos here on YouTube, or you can go find it on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. And if you can't tell already, I've said that 40, 50, 60 times, so I kind of get that string of podcast providers easily to roll off the tip of my tongue. But it reduces the cases where... So anyways, what I was saying is I had to work through a problem with merging carts. I had one cart that, so basically when a customer is logged in, their not logged in cart is merged with their logged in cart, and replicating that is a pain. It is an absolute pain. And I found that by creating an integration test, and yes, creating the integration test was a little bit challenging, but all I had to do is hit Control-Shift-D, and I was able to replicate this every single time without having to go to Firefox, log out, add an item to the cart, go to Chrome or Incognito, whatever, add an item to the cart. It's a pain. It's an absolute pain. And it makes these test cases very easy to reproduce. So I have yet to see any downsides except for the time aspect, and we will see over the course of time that that problem will somewhat go away. And I think this last one here, I missed reading this. It forces us to write readable and testable code. This is when I found that testing started clicking for me when I started writing readable and testable code. It's kind of a catch-22 or chicken and egg, those idioms in the English vocabulary here. In other words, the more testable code I write, the easier it is to test the code. So it takes less time to write tests for the code, which means that my code is going to be easier to read. It kind of goes in circles, but it certainly makes sense. But we might get the benefits of writing testable code. It might make sense to us, but it just seems so hard. So let me break it down and make it easy for you. What if we started from scratch together today and we wrote a couple of tests? Well, I'm going to break down what tests we're going to write. I'm going to talk about unit testing and integration testing. I'm not going to talk about functional testing or anything else. We're just going to focus on a couple of very basic testing capabilities, which I think will get you started, and we can, of course, dive in and get a little more deep later. I think one of the biggest challenges, at least for me and my experience in coming up to speed on testing, is that advanced concepts are introduced too early. At least if we just start by writing a little bit of tests, just writing a little bit of code in this to get our feet wet. It doesn't have to be the most advanced, incredible, beautiful test ever. So we just start. We're going to get in the hang of it. And I think, Simon, if you're on here today, you would agree. Simon has been a great example of somebody who has gotten into writing integration tests. Simon Frost has stuck with it, kept going, and it's made a huge difference for him in what he's been working on. So let's look at how to get started here very quickly. I'm not going to take a lot of time. If you have questions, I'll be happy to answer those at the end. I'm not going to take a lot of time as far as these individual steps because this is YouTube, right? You can stop it. You can run the commands. You can go back through and replicate this fairly easily. So we install the Magento 2 test framework. And you say, Joseph, come on. Doesn't Magento 2 come with its own integration test framework? Yes. But this Reach Digital one is stripped back. We don't need all the fancy bells and whistles that Magento integration test framework comes with. We just need something that works and is fast. That's the most important thing. It's fast. Now, I will say I have not been able to get my testing to be very fast. I am not an expert at test-driven development. In fact, I've done very little test-driven development. But I figure in my journey, I'm learning, and maybe in a couple months from now, I will be good at, or decent at least, at doing test-driven development. But I found that starting with what I currently do, what I currently know, and writing tests for that is the easiest way to get our feet wet. Again, I'm not proposing a massive paradigm shift in how you write code. Just start simple. And I'm looking at the comments over here. It is so wonderful to see you all on from all over the world. Philippines, Pakistan, Minnesota, Ukraine, Canada, Italy, Malaysia, Bolivia. Yeah, this is so cool. All right. So the first step, we have to install this framework. The next step is to create an integration test database. We're going to talk about the difference between unit tests and integration tests, but at least we want to have our database set. And here's the very important step. We need to go into the Magento integration folder, dev test integration etc, and we copy the install config mysql.php.dist. We remove the dist off of that. And then we go and configure this a little bit. So, for example, we need to have unfortunately, we need to have Elasticsearch spun up. We need to specify our database name and database username and password. Super simple to do this, but this is a very important step. Then we need to go into this quick integration directory that is installed into our project, and we need to change the phpunit.xml.dist to phpunit.xml. It's good to commit this file. I like to commit this file. This file back here should not be committed because this will likely change per environment, one developer to another, but this one will not change. It's always going to be phpunit.xml. The information in it's going to stay the same. Then we go into PHP Storm's settings, go into PHP test framework, and we set the default configuration file to be this phpunit.xml file. Now, you can always create a new test framework for unit tests and separate them out from integration tests. Unit tests are probably a little bit faster, but you'll see today I kind of take a hybrid approach to both unit tests and integration tests. And so I find that just one for both of those works okay for my purposes. Now, inside this phpunit.xml file, so we are inside of it now, you'll see the default code right here. This is what the Reach Digital test quick integration comes with for the phpunit.xml file. But what I've added here is a couple of new lines, test/integration, and then so basically just a couple extra directories. So one thing you can do is after I took this screenshot, is you can also create ones for test unit if you would like that as well. Just depends on where you want to go, where you want to start with on your journey here. And then we create our first test. So let's come over here and create a test. So I'm going to come into download product, and we are going to create our first test. Like, it's going to be our first and most basic test that we literally could ever write. And you'll see it is not as difficult as you might think. So I'm going to, just a little bit of background here. This is part of my project that I'm working on for my upcoming course for the art of e-commerce debugging. So this course will give you experience as far as how to approach some really difficult problems and then how you can solve those difficult problems. I'm going to walk you through all that. So this project, and I've taken a lot of the code from our swiftotter.com website. We've written quite a little code on there. And part of this is the download products to facilitate easier product downloads. We've done a lot of changes compared to default Magento. And part of that is this this model here where we store the order ID, the order item ID, and then sharing this download with somebody else. Okay, so you go to the website, you say, hey, I would like to share this study guide or this course with my colleague or somebody that I'm mentoring. Great, well, we need to store that information somewhere. So that's kind of the background idea. We're using extension attributes to associate these together. However, one little trick that I like to do is I like to associate my extension attributes in the factory. So this order user information should be attached to the order item, and I make sure that those objects are created when the order item factory is initialized. And so I'm attaching this to the after create for the item factory. So let's write a test to verify that this works. But before we even write a test to verify this works, let's just write a very, very basic test. And all of you can easily do this yourself. So I'm going to create a new folder, test slash, we're going to start out with more or less of a unit test, but so we'll just put in the unit directory, test unit. I like to name it by its file name, except we append test to the end of the file name. So this is order user information initialization test.php. And one thing just to note is you might say, Joseph, that is a stupid, ridiculous, long file name. Yeah, I get that. But it's really, really easy to understand. And that's why I like to do it, because it is so easy to understand. I'm looking at this directory here, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, I get exactly what this does. So let's drop our namespace, Swift Auto Download Product. Class is this extends test case. This is the most important thing. PHP unit framework test case. And we're going to drop our test in here. Public function test assert true. This is just so basic. This assert true. True. True is true. So this is literally what we're going to drop here, and it will guaranteed pass this test. And so all we have to do, again, I'm on a Mac on PHP Storm. I hit Control-Shift-D now that I've configured the environment appropriately, and I run it. Now, one thing you'll note is when you run it the first time, it will take a couple of minutes to install. Basically, Magento is being installed, and I will show you right here, into dev test integration temp, and then this is the Magento, where Magento has been installed. So we see our Etsy directory, we see our env.php, we see our config file, etc., our var folder with a cache in here. So in other words, if you create a plugin for a new plugin, you want to go clean out the cache directory inside the sandbox directory so that this running Magento again will flush that cache. One other thing to note here is I mentioned in PHP Unit XML, there is a very important file here, and that is a directive, test cleanup. If this is set to disabled, this is the fastest way to run it. And again, it's still not lightning fast. I've seen some people talk about milliseconds to run one. I have just not gotten there. Maybe it's because I'm on a Mac. I've spent days working on it, and I'm hopeful to get it eventually. It's just not something that I've been able to figure out yet. But this test cleanup is, if you have this set to enabled, all the tables in the database are going to be cleaned out, and Magento will be reinstalled. So this is good if you need to run a setup, like a patch. That would work. That would be a great way to do that. I'm not aware of a way off the top of my head to run that in Magento itself, but it still probably would be. There might be a way to do it, but the easiest is just mark this. If you need to run a patch, like a data patch, a schema patch, just set this to be enabled, run a test. Magento will clean itself out, reinstall itself, and it'll be back here to normal. And then just make sure to flip this back to disabled again. So with that all said, we have officially run this test. It ran. So this is really exciting. We see one test, one assertion. I just love seeing this green. That means we were successful in getting this. And to me, that was a huge step in being able to start feeling comfortable, is the fact that, wow, I actually got a test to run. And you might come across some scenarios where stuff is breaking, weird things are happening, et cetera, et cetera. And I'll give you the inside scoop as far as where to find that here a little bit later. But first, one of the big questions I've always had is what do I write tests for? Starting out, here is what I would suggest writing tests for. And pretty much, well, mostly in this order. I guess plugins should probably be higher than observers. Business logic is probably one of the most important places to write tests. And you could ultimately take out the services if you want to. Personally, I like to write tests for sure everything in the action directory. Again, I've not been 100% perfect. I will say that absolutely right now, that it's a work in progress. But writing a test for everything in the action directory, and the actions, again, I've talked about this in previous videos, but the way I look at these actions is specific bite-sized chunks of business logic. So this right here, custom option to share request. This can be run from anywhere, and this is hopefully the single place that this configuration, this action, this business logic will take place. Period. That's it. It will happen here. If it doesn't happen here, it's not happening anywhere else. And especially as your applications grow, you're going to find this concept becoming increasingly valuable. You have one place that does this one thing ever, and being disciplined to keep that, and and disciplining yourself to, when you come across areas that maybe another team member built out that sure seems like it's very similar, to interact with them, say, hey, can I merge this back into this single workflow? It's very important, and it will save you so much grief. I can tell you quite a number of stories as far as how that has helped me, and I know it will help you in this process. So test the business logic. And that's probably the most important thing, because ultimately, I think we would all agree, for the most part, observers and plugins often fit into this business logic. Within it, there might be some exceptions, but those often work with existing functionality, and we're modifying it or customizing it one way or another. View models on the front end, how information is sent to or rendered on the front end. This can go both ways, but ultimately view models usually relate back to business logic in one sort or another, and these actions should be powering, at least in my experience, a good portion of what the view model is referencing. So even in that way, this business logic, as long as it's tested, it's going to provide the majority of the test coverage. In my experience, once tests are written, they are literally, that area is about as bug-free as it possibly can. Now, if there's misunderstandings or implementation that needs to change or scope changes, you can't test for that, of course. But it's usually how this tested area ends up interacting with the greater application. The inputs for that test is usually where the problems happen, in my experience. So, of course, you could test those as well. I just don't test controllers, because, again, if you're thinking about these dry principles, those should be going through our central sources for business logic, and I just don't like putting that into controllers. Now, we could have controllers like if it's for CRUD application, create, retrieve, update, and delete. Yeah, at that point, I have a hard time seeing the value in testing that, just because it does take some time. Is it worth it? Possibly. But again, we are still under the gun. So it's a constant balancing act. Do we test this or not? But there are some things we just have to test. And models. Models should be done right. They are just getters and setters. There's no reason to test that in my opinion. So this is what we should test. This is what we shouldn't worry about testing. Again, this is just my opinion. If you have thoughts or suggestions, I welcome to hear those. So here's the basic idea. Unit test is testing a single method or unit of functionality. So what's interesting is that most of the concepts, most of the examples in the Magento core code are unit tests, including the ones in the Magento test integration test directory. Now, one thing to note is this is incredibly powerful and inspiring to look through this directory. It will give you so many good ideas. And this is dev, tests, integration, test suite, Magento. And so we can go find a directory in here. Let's go into sales and model and I don't know, order item repository test. And we can see how Magento does it. And that was also incredibly liberating. Here are some people that, I don't know, these people have written hundreds or thousands of tests. And here's how they do it. Now, maybe I like this idea. Maybe I don't. I can learn from it. Hey, it's good to improve on what we see. It's not good to just take everything we see as face value and just go on with that. So looking and learning from these tests. So a lot of these are more on the order of being unit tests. Unit tests, again, are about testing a single method or unit functionality. For example, hopefully your classes, as we talked about last time, have one public method if they're if they're business logic or these actions I've been talking about. So testing one of these is testing a single public method is really helpful. And it's a good way to approach this. We'll talk about the difference between that and integration tests at a later time. But if you see it here, basically this order information initialization, that's test that we started writing. What we are doing in this case is, and I've stripped it way back, but we're testing the after create method. So in our subject, our test subject, we are running through after create. Do we get extension attributes associated with this? And if so, great. That's literally what we are testing here. So it's testing an output. Integration tests, on the other hand, test how does this fit into the bigger picture. So we might actually call order item factory create, which then this plugin is a part of it. So integration tests are kind of the big picture. Unit tests are hyper-focused on one particular method. So unit tests, while they can be quick and dirty, and there's definitely, I will say, I agree with Joseph Leedy on this, unit tests are, Magento unit tests are not necessarily the best example, but they are an example. They can get you help to get started. Writing clean unit tests is a whole different story, and, oops, I am blocking some text here, is a whole different story, and I'll be happy to talk about that in the future. I don't want to overload you now, and that's the biggest thing, is if you just at least get started writing tests, you yourself will figure out ways to clean this stuff up over time. That is going to happen. It's a guaranteed process. You are going to learn. You're going to clean this up over time. You're going to get better at it. So this is what a unit test would be. We want to test the input and the output. We can control the input through mocks. For example, we can, and we'll talk about what a mock is, but basically we can take a picture, if you will, of an item, and we can assign values to it, pass that into our method, and see what we get out of that. So we are testing, we can customize the input, and then we see what the output is like. And one thing to note is here for the object manager in unit tests, you would use this. So you would create a new object manager that's in the unit, as in the unit helper, and pass in this argument is the test case. So if you're inside your test class, you would pass an instance of this. Now, on to integration tests. This is how things fit together. And again, I'm not going to say this is probably the most ideal, perfect way to look at it, but I find myself sometimes going into a hybrid of the two, of unit and integration test. Integration test is how this everything fits together in a big piece. So we can say, okay, are the order attributes have they been added as a result of this? You still can test. My example here is kind of a abstract or a new named version of the test, or of the test class. So you can write it like this, or you can also just, well, in this example here, pulling it up, we could just go ahead and say, create one for this order user information loading test, but we test the bigger picture. We test that calling the item repository get method, for example, includes this extension attribute. So it's the big picture. Okay, does my plugin actually work in the first place? And if it does, is it returning the right values from the database? Integration testing is usually much bigger of a perspective, but at the end of the day, we are still validating usually that this one method did what it's supposed to. It fit into the big picture and it's working. So it just depends how you want to approach this, and I hate using the term "it depends," but I think over time you'll get the picture as far as even the Magento integration tests are somewhat hybridized even at that. So I'm trying to draw your attention to the fact that it's not so strict. Those delineations are not as strict as they might seem to be. All right, so here's an example of a integration test. So we are calling, back in our previous example, we are calling this subject create. Create has an after create plugin, which adds the extension attributes, which then ends up, well, then we can test to make sure those extension attributes are set properly. That's the difference. So instead of calling the plugin directly and passing information to that plugin, we are calling the create method, which calls that plugin. It's kind of another level or layer of functionality in the mix. So here's a couple of notes about integration tests. Number one, it verifies how our method fits into the system. So if we have not properly declared our plugin, well, we're going to find it out really quickly, as opposed to having to go through whatever this order process is. Okay, I have to load up and refresh the page, load up an order on the back end. But wouldn't it be just faster just to hit Command-Shift-D, or actually, is it Command-D, I think, actually, on Mac? Or Control-D. Control-Shift-D or Control-D. Just to be able to hit that and it's immediately verified? Yeah, that would be nice. And I would say that getting results can be a little more difficult than with unit tests. Can be, but in my opinion, it just makes more sense. We are verifying this in the same way we would verify it on the front end. So yeah, there is a couple of differences. Before we actually spend the last few minutes of our conversation here today writing a couple of tests, one unit test, one integration test, I want to cover a couple of important ideas. Number one, every single test is run with a new object. So if we come over here, and this test that we started writing here, this assert true if there was 4 tests in here, four of these methods. Every method is run in a new object. So for example, if you set a class property, you're in one method, in one test, you would not be able to access it in another. It's a new, fresh version of this class every time. However, it has been a mistake that I've made that I have used the public function to initialize values in the database, and we'll talk about what that means in a second. That is a mistake to do that. Instead, we want to use the setup class, or setup method, protected method. This is run every time just before the test is run. The reason we don't want to use the construct, at least from what I observed in my tests, no pun intended, is that the constructor is called, for example, 3 times, and then so it's created. Each object is created. Object 1, 2, and 3 is created, and then Object 1's test is run, Object 2's second test is run, Object 3's third test is run. So if we use the constructor, all of our database fixtures have all been initialized and not reset between those tests, if you get what I'm saying there. So it's much better to use the setup method. The data is fresher and is closer to the actual test being run than it would be in the constructor. Hey, Dan, good to see you on, my friend. So setup, and then there's also a teardown method. And just as a little note here, I find it not overly intuitive to use the teardown method. Magento seems to more rely on rollbacks when it comes to using rollbacks in, for example, the setup method. And the reason I like that is I'm able to get in and test this code out a little bit better. For example, let's say my test ran and I want to get back into the database and I want to see what happened, why was this information not set. It gives that information a little bit longer of a life cycle from the last test that was run, of course, as opposed to the setup and teardown. I have to catch it with Xdebug, which is not a problem at all. I hope every one of you is using Xdebug, by the way. And if not, I do have a free course, Mastering Xdebug. Just do a Google search for it. It should pull up. And it'll get you going on Xdebug. Xdebug will transform your life. I guarantee it. So make sure you use the setup method for database updates. And for integration tests, you can use the help test framework helper bootstrap get object manager, which works quite well for that. So here is the next step. We need to control the inputs to our given method, to our given test, to our given class that we're running. We have two ways of doing this. We can use mocks or we can use fixtures. Mocks or fixtures, data fixtures. And let's quickly talk about what each one of those is. Number one, a mock is a fake version of the class. We control the output for every method, and what's even better than that is we get to make an assertion that this method should be run one time, multiple times, or any number of times, or should not be run at all. So in other words, this is getting incredibly specific. Now, I find this mostly useful on unit testing, although I think I've used it occasionally on integration testing. The problem with this, and it's the biggest problem that I've observed with unit testing, is it's brittle. It is incredibly brittle. You are not necessarily testing the output of a method. You are testing how the method itself operates. And that's a really big difference. I think it's the most intuitive to test the input for a method and the output for a method. Provided this input, this output is what happens. So we don't care what happens inside this box of the method. As long as we get the output, that's all we're happy with, the right output. So using these test doubles, these mocks, can be very helpful, but it also can make us go down the rabbit hole of becoming too specific. And there are some cases that you want to be very specific. Okay, I need to ensure that this code works, that even the inner workings of this code functions as I expect them to. Now, then again, you don't have to assert how many times this code is run. You can say expects this any, and the biggest reason we would do this is this will return portion right here. So we can return anything. We can there's a way to make it give an array, and so this first time it's called, it returns this value. The second time it's called this value, etc., etc. But I find keeping these pretty simple. If I need to specify a will return value, yeah, I can do that. It's pretty easy. So in this case, we are just creating an object and we are passing it in for use, and we are then looking for the output or everything to work properly. So it just depends on how you want to work this, but this is an example of a unit test. So we have configured our mock here, and at the end we have our after create. We are very specifically calling this plugin, and we are loading in our order item factory. That was the subject for this plugin, and then we pass it to the order item we just created. That is a unit test. I find it quite easy to at least play around with these. You get the idea of how unit tests work pretty quickly. Let's talk about mocks just for another minute or so. So Git mock builder is available on the test case, or in other words, this, and it allows us to build mocks. And I'm going to walk you through an example of how to do this very quickly. And just so you know, I am not winging this, because I just want to make sure that this is working as expected. So let's quickly create a unit test, and then we'll go from there. So one thing I like to do is I like to anonymize my test objects as much as possible. So in this case, this is a very specific unit test for order user information initialization. Inside this, then I can copy and paste these tests. It speeds up the time to replicate. I have a test subject, which I then assigned test subject equals object manager. Let's see here, test framework, object manager, get instance, get, and then I can copy in this one right here. Now, instead of just aliasing this out or simplifying the fully qualified name, I replace with alias and I call this test subject. So everywhere I reference this in the code, I reference this test subject. So if I'm going to go test another type of, copy this test somewhere else, I just have to swap this out. And of course, all the other test and implementation details. But this is pretty much boilerplate. I never have to touch. It works pretty well. So here's what we're going to do really quickly. I'm going to copy this code, and we talked about this, and we're going to order. Let's see here, Magento sales model order item, and we will order item model. There we go, and we have our order item factory. I'm going to copy this up here. So as we talked about earlier, we are creating an order item. We are mocking this out and creating, again, a sample one. What this does is our mock builder takes this order item class and it basically extends it. We are disabling the original constructor. So if we look at the order item model, most of these, Magento, have this constructor here, and we really don't want to go through the effort of creating all this information. We just want extension attributes off of this thing. So we disable the original constructor, and we say we're only going to work with these methods. All the other methods will function as expected. So we can call get product ID, and that will work. And we get our mock. And all we have to do here is we could say this any if we wanted to not say this once. We could just say this any. Here's our method, and it will return null. Same thing for here. And finally, what we do is we just call this plugin. It's honestly pretty easy. After create, passes it in here, initialize, we get set extension attributes. So let's run this. And we'll see what our output is. So we see we have a breakpoint that is set. And looks like it mostly worked. Now, we could do some assertions. But in this case, the assertions actually come in the form of the fact that set attributes, extension attributes, was called. Let's see, we could call we could say this set to be 5, and let me run this again, and we will get an exception that this was not called 5 times. See, test failed, and here we go, test failed. Was supposed to be called 5 times. So this is a very easy way to verify that, and there's a whole bunch of other ways that we can go in beyond that. So I'm not going to go too deeply there. I hope you get the idea. One thing to note is there's only methods overrides the output from just these methods, so we can specify the methods we want to override, as well as add methods is great for when we want to mock out an interface. So I could have also done a order. I won't do that here. An order item interface. And we say add methods, and those are the methods that are now available for this given interface. Excellent. You guys are hanging in here with me. We're going to, I'm going to skip past this one for now, just because I don't have much time to talk about fixtures. And fixtures are really important. So one thing I have found that is really helpful for fixtures is there's a whole bunch of fixtures that are stored in the dev test integration tests suite. Magento, line break is not good there. There's a whole bunch stored there. So you can get in and see exactly how Magento does it. And I find those are quick and dirty, but I don't think they need to be anything special. They're often very messy, and especially when we start getting into complex things like bundled products, boy, can those be a bit of a disaster. So, but I don't think they necessarily have to be the cleanest or prettiest thing ever. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes it's just easier, more manageable for us to create our own fixtures. Now, I forgot to answer the question of what is a fixture. A fixture is a object that has been created or initialized in the database. Simple as that. So in the case, it might be an order. It might be a product. It might be an order and an order item and a product. It could be anything. And basically, this is going to be this is real life data that is then passed in, that we load, pass into our test, and see how it runs. So I find these are incredible. These are much more intuitive to work with because we're working with real live data as opposed to working with unit tests. And okay, unit tests being very specific, but I don't know. Real life data just is much more intuitive. So here is how we could include a fixture, a data fixture. We create a PHP file and we include this. Super simple and easy. Or we can include a Magento data fixture, ones that are stored in dev test integration, test suite, pick a directory. I like the sales directory, files. And here's all those data fixtures I was talking about. So for example, here's order. And if we see the default rollback, the rollback is going to clean out this order. It's going to create a new simple product and create the addresses, etc., a payment, an order item, an order, and it's going to save everything. As such, if we were to call this in our test, we now have a living, breathing order that we can do whatever we want to do with. And it works. It works pretty well. So we're going to write an integration test ourselves, as well as a data fixture. I show it's 11 o'clock. That works pretty well. And Joseph Leedy made a quick comment, said that using the create mock method to eliminate a lot of the boilerplate, including disable original constructor. Yes, I've used that some, and I cannot remember. I've had some problems with that. So I guess I have gone back to that. I guess I go back and forth, and maybe there's no good reason for going back and forth. So that's good. Check out the create mock. I had those other in a reference in a couple slides back. So let's come back to our let's go create an integration test. So we created our unit test. I'm going to go create a new file. We're going to test that this order user information loading works. So what this does is after the order item has been loaded from the order item resource, it is going to load and see if there's order user information that's available, and it's going to set those on the extension attributes. Fairly simple, but it's a great, easy thing to test. So what we're going to do is create a new integration test, integration/plugin/order user information loading test.php. Oopsie, and you can't see my screen. There we go. Test case. All right. So I'm going to pull out some of I have my code that I've already written here just to make life a little bit faster for you all, and we'll talk through exactly what this does. All right. So, I should copy my use section out here. All right, so what this does is we have two tests in here, and here's our data fixture. I've created this. We will be creating this data fixture, so we'll talk about exactly what that does. And we have our setup method, and we have our test. setup, we'll call our own personal data fixture that we've created. We've created one called for rollback, and we can call that here and use order user information. Now, we could ultimately add rollback into order user information. I've just run into problems when I do that. How do I say this? When calling it, if I have to call, for example, two versions of order information, use order user information, it just ends up, rollback can be called too frequently and can really jack up my database. So I find that keeping those calls separate is easier for me. I know Magento does not do that, but it's just a little bit easier for me. So we have our Magento data fixture, which loads up this order data fixture, which creates an order, a product, order item, payment information, shipping and billing address. And so what we're doing here, this is quick and dirty. Like, this is really quick and dirty, but we know, because the orders have been rolled back, and that's baked into our order.php fixture, we know that we should have only one order item in the database. So that's why I am loading up this collection, calling get first item. Now, one thing to note is we have create and get on the object manager. Hopefully you know the difference. I really hope you do, because that's critical here. It saves us from having to call a order item collection factory and then create a method off of that. So we get our order item ID, we have our test subject, we call get. Now, what is our test subject? Our test subject is this order item, it's this order item repository. So we could make this more of a unit test by directly calling this plugin. We could pass in all the parameters necessary for this plugin, and that works. But it's really nice to know that this plugin fits into the greater scheme of things, and it works. So that's why I love integration tests. I feel like they're really easy to grasp and master. So let's go create our two fixtures. The first one is going to be the rollback. So _files, order user information rollback.php. And we'll go fetch this. What's going to go down here is this. So what we're doing is we are fetching our resource model, calling get collection delete. Like, this is very raw, basic changes, but it works just great. It works really well, and it cleans out the database table. So we know once this runs order user information, that table has no values in it. So the next step would be to actually create some new order user information, and we're going to run that file like this. So this is order user information.php. And for some reason, Magento likes to use snake case as opposed to camel case for these file names, or title case. All right, so basically in this one, we are getting, again, our first order item. Again, we are presuming that the order data fixture has already been run. We have an order item already available. We are creating a new version of order user information, setting these values on here, and these values can be whatever we want them to be. And then we are getting our order user information resource model, and we are inserting it in order or user information get data. Now, one thing to note is we could call resource save and pass in user information. That works too. However, I don't like to do that, because one thing that can be very helpful to reference these data fixtures in the future is by setting the ID on this. So if we wanted to specifically work with ID 1 of this user information, load it up, or make sure it loads from the database or something along those lines, well, then we could set the ID. But we have to use this insert, because once the ID is set, calling save, the save method on this resource, checks up and says, hey, is there an ID already set? And if it is, we're going to try to update this in the database. And of course, this row cannot be updated in the database because it doesn't exist in the database, and it fails. It fails really bad. So I find that just the default of using insert. And if we want to use the type checking that is hopefully as part of your models, set it on the model and then just call get data and save it to the database. So with all of that said, we've included our order user information. One thing to note is use descriptive names for your tests. In fact, you can also, and I did not do this here, but you can actually also add a message here. So We can say order item ID is set on the user information and extension attributes. So you're adding extra messages. The more information you can provide about the specific test case, the more happy you will be here in the future as you run this. So we have our collection. We get an order item ID out of this. We say test subject get, and if test subject is too generic for you, fine. Just call it order item repository, whatever you want to do there. And call get. So let's run this. And so I've created 2 tests in this particular test file. I've created one to see that the order item extension attributes are loaded correctly, and I've created one that ensures that it works when it is not run. And oddly, I think it's because I have OBS running here. My tests are a little bit slower. Normally, they run a lot faster. So just keep that in mind. But actually, I will say on this one, it is expensive because this order fixture creates a new simple product every single time. Like every single time. And creating a product and saving that through the product repository is really expensive. So I have a link here that you can copy out for swiftauto.com/simple-product, simple-product. And it's how I create a new simple product and basically save it so I can just reload it. And that speeds up my tests big time. Because I'm not usually changing data on a product. Sometimes I am, but rarely is that the case. And if I am, I'll just create a new data fixture and set those values there and keep those same caching mechanisms in place. It makes it a lot simpler. All right, so I think we talked about this. Oh, one thing to note for troubleshooting is Magento Test Framework application install. If you are having trouble installing this, and chances are most of you will have trouble installing the test framework for the first time because let's just say a lot of modules do not like to be installed or initialized at the same time Magento is also initialized. That just does not play well. And it mostly comes down to CLI commands and database calls in the constructor of classes, which is just really bad all around. So if you want to get more information as far as what's happening in there, go set a breakpoint in this command. You'll be able to get the exact command to run the Magento setup. You'll be able to watch it go through the process. You can set breakpoints in there. It makes it really easy. So I'm available for any questions. That's what I wanted to talk about. This, my friends, will transform your capability to write really good, solid code. At least that has been my experience. And I'm not going to say I'm an expert at writing tests, and I'm still learning. I loved Joseph had some great comments, and Dan had a couple questions. So this is something I'm learning on myself, but it's a journey. It's a journey I'm on. It's a journey I'm not going to stop learning, and it is a journey I encourage every one of you to join me on. Your life, your career as a developer will be enriched. You will write better code. People will say, wow, QA will be saying, none of us like QA that much, right? But QA will become your best friend. They're like, wow, this code that he wrote, these tickets he's working on, he or she's working on, I'm not really seeing any problems with it. And on a consistent basis, because, hey, you've already done the testing for them. You've already done this work for them. And so they really aren't going to have any issues with that. All right, Dan, do you have a separate database you are using for testing with data from the database? Yes. So for my integration tests, I have, for example, my SwiftAuto database, which has the copy from the production database or sanitized. That's funny. I'm going to hang up on this one. Oh, my screen wasn't shared. I had a teammate calling me. So this we have my SwiftAuto local database, which has local information from production, sanitized or whatever, and then I have my integration database. So SwiftAuto integration tests or whatever. So yes, it is separate. Very good. Any other questions? Otherwise, we will wrap it up today. I look forward to continuing conversation on this testing stuff. And I hope, let me know either way. I really want to hear. I hope I made this very palatable and understandable for you. It was a challenge for me learning at the beginning, and it honestly took me years to start in and to learn this, to kind of start figuring it out, to really get the hang of it. And I'm still learning, as you can tell. But as you're able to get in there and figure this stuff out, and I hope I accelerated some of that process for you, boy, will your life be a lot easier. And I would suggest that every one of you joins me over here on our Slack channel, https://swiftauto.com/Slack. It's a free channel. Feel free to join in. And we have a debugging channel, we have a debugging channel. And I don't know if we have a testing channel, but I think that would be a good one to create. So I think I will go create that one right after our conversation here. So make sure to join this. I would love for every one of you to be a part of this. It's growing, it's thriving, it's really, really exciting. Quick question from Dan. How often do you use assert true to make sure your tests pass? I find that assert true, it works if the return type is Boolean. If it's anything but Boolean, I don't use assert true. I would use then assert equals. In my opinion, assert true makes it a little more difficult to see exactly what value should be matched. Now, if it is, again, Boolean result, yeah, that makes sense. But the first parameter of assert equals is what our expectation is. The second parameter is the return value from the given method. So, and then of course the third parameter is a message that we can attach there. So I find it's fairly, it makes it easier to understand when we use assert equals as opposed to assert true. But there's a whole bunch of assertions. It's not just one that we have to use. Very good. Well, this has been an absolute pleasure to be with you all today. I hope this Ninja training has been helpful. If it has been, make sure to give this a like. Even better, give this channel a subscribe. Again, it's free. I want to help you guys and gals be excellent debuggers. And I could not believe this more, that testing is very much on the track to achieve that great goal. So it's been a pleasure having you all on, and look forward to next month. Next month, we've already put the video up. We'll be continuing our conversation, this Ninja conversation, and I'm looking forward to it already. So I hope you are as well. Take care.